Bright and Sandra lived in a small riverside community in the Amazon, surrounded by a vast expanse of green and the constant melody of birds and the river winding through the forest. They were dedicated rubber tappers, spending long hours in the humid heat of the forest extracting latex from rubber trees. Life in the community was simple but full of hardships. However, what weighed most heavily on them was the fact that they had not yet been able to have children after 5 years of marriage. Sandra, with her long black hair and eyes that reflected the depth of the forest, often found herself alone, crying by the riverbank, her tears mingling with the muddy waters. Bright, a strong man of few words, would silently embrace her, sharing her pain in a restrained manner. "We will succeed, Sandra. We have to believe," he said, his voice firm but laden with uncertainty. The years of failed attempts brought not only sadness but also the cruel judgment of the community. The older women offered traditional advice and herbal potions, each more desperate than the last. "You need to say the full moon prayer with the roots of the Acariquera," suggested Dona Iasi, an old healer. Sandra tried everything, but nothing seemed to work. The pressure mounted, and the conversations around her became increasingly difficult to ignore. "I heard Sandra can't have children," a neighbor whispered. "What a shame. I wonder how long Bright will put up with this." These murmurs were like poison to Sandra. One night, she collapsed in Bright's arms, sobbing. "I can't take it anymore, Bright. People, they think I'm less of a woman because I can't give you a child," Sandra said, tears streaming freely. Bright, with his serious demeanor, held her tightly. "You are everything to me, Sandra. Child or not, we're in this together. Always." Then, on a stiflingly hot day when the forest seemed to be on fire under the merciless sun, a miracle happened. Sandra began to feel nauseous and dizzy. At first, she thought it was just the heat, but when the symptoms persisted, she decided to seek help. Dona Iasi, with her shrewd gaze, smiled enigmatically. "It seems the spirits of the forest have finally heard us, girl. You're pregnant." The news spread through the community like wildfire. Bright and Sandra were now the center of attention, but this time, it was joyful and hopeful attention. The following months were filled with care and preparation. The community, once critical, now united in support. That night, when Naomi was born, the forest seemed to breathe along with the new life. The baby's cries echoed through the trees, mingling with the songs of nocturnal birds and the whisper of the wind among the leaves. "She's perfect, Bright," Sandra murmured, holding little Naomi in her arms. "Yes, she is. Our miracle," Bright replied, his eyes shining with rare emotion. The first months were pure happiness. Naomi brought light and laughter to the small wooden house. Neighbors often came to see the child, bringing simple gifts like baskets of fruit and handmade toys. But complete happiness is often interrupted by unexpected shadows. One night, while putting Naomi to sleep, Sandra looked at Bright with silent concern. What if something goes wrong?" she asked. "It won't. She's strong like you," Bright said, but deep down, he shared the same fears. Life in the Amazon was unpredictable. Each day brought new challenges, from battling tropical diseases to the harshness of working in the forest. But Bright and Sandra were determined to face any obstacle. They had Naomi now, their little ray of hope. That night, as the sound of the forest lulled the small family to sleep, Bright and Sandra promised themselves they would do everything to protect and care for Naomi, no matter what happened. Little did they know that the true test of their strength and love was yet to come. And so, in the heart of the Amazon, the journey of Bright, Sandra, and Naomi began, weaving a story of resilience, love, and hope against the odds of the jungle. Happiness and challenges. Naomi grew up amidst the vastness of the Amazon rainforest, where each day was a new adventure. The small wooden house of Bright and Sandra was situated by a rushing river, where the sounds of nature were the constant soundtrack of their lives. Naomi, with her curious eyes and adventurous spirit, was the joy of the family and the community. Sandra, now a devoted mother, spent her days teaching Naomi about medicinal plants and the secrets of the forest. On a sunny morning, while they were gathering herbs by the riverbank, Naomi asked a question that left Sandra speechless for a moment. "Mom, why do the trees cry?" Naomi asked, watching the sap drip from a rubber tree. Sandra smiled, kneeling beside her daughter. They're not crying, my love. They're giving us a gift. The sap that comes out helps us make rubber, which we use for so many things. It's their way of helping us, Sandra explained, stroking Naomi's hair. But not everything was so poetic and peaceful. Life in the forest was tough, and Bright and Sandra faced constant challenges. The long journeys to collect latex were exhausting, and tropical diseases were always lurking. Bright, with his serious demeanor and unwavering determination, led the efforts to support the family. But the weight of responsibility was starting to take its toll. On a particularly hot night, after a long day of work, Bright and Sandra were sitting on the porch, watching Naomi play with a rag doll that Sandra had made. She is our light, Sandra. Sometimes I wonder how we managed to live without her for so long, Bright said, his deep voice breaking the silence of the night. Sandra, with a gentle smile, replied, "Yes, she is. But I also worry, Bright. Life here is so uncertain. What if something happens to her?" Bright took a deep breath, looking into the darkness of the forest. "We won't let anything happen to her. We'll do whatever it takes to protect her. But we need to be strong, Sandra. For us and for her." The months passed, and Naomi continued to grow, learning more and more about life in the forest. Her free and curious spirit led her to explore unknown corners and ask intriguing questions. "Dad, why does the river sing at night?" she asked once while they were walking along the riverbank. Bright looked at the flowing water, reflecting the moonlight. "The river has many stories to tell, Naomi. It carries the secrets of the forest and the people who live here. At night, when everything is quiet, it sings those stories for anyone who wants to listen," Bright explained, holding Naomi's little hand. But the tranquility was interrupted by worrying news. In the small community, rumors arose that a new road was being planned to pass through the forest, threatening the lives and livelihoods of the rubber tappers. Bright and Sandra, as respected leaders in the community, decided to organize a meeting to discuss the impacts of this change. On the night of the meeting, Bright and Sandra's house was packed. The worried faces of the neighbors reflected the growing tension. Bright stood up to speak, his voice echoing with determination. "We need to unite and fight against this road. If it is built, we will lose our rubber trees, our homes, and our way of life. We cannot let this happen," he declared, his voice firm. Dona Iasi, the community healer, nodded vigorously. "Bright is right. This forest is our home. We need to defend it with all our strength," she added, her voice trembling with emotion. The following days were marked by meetings and heated discussions. Bright and Sandra led a campaign to stop the road construction, seeking support from other communities and environmental organizations. Naomi, watching everything with her curious eyes, felt the weight of the responsibility her parents carried. One afternoon, while helping Sandra plant herbs in the garden, Naomi asked, "Mom, are we going to save the forest?" Sandra stopped what she was doing and looked deeply into Naomi's eyes. "We will, my love, because we are not alone. The forest is with us, and we are with it. With courage and unity, we can overcome any challenge," Sandra said, hugging her daughter tightly. The battle against the road construction was arduous, but it also strengthened the community's bonds. Naomi, inspired by her parents' determination, began to understand the importance of the fight for forest preservation. The little girl who once asked why the trees cried now knew that true strength came from unity and love for their land. And so, as the sun set over the vastness of the Amazon rainforest, Bright, Sandra, and Naomi prepared to face the challenges ahead, knowing that true happiness lay in fighting for what they loved. The accident. It was a typical weekend in the small riverside community, with the stifling heat and the incessant buzzing of insects echoing through the forest. As usual, Bright was swamped with work. The recent mobilization against the construction of the road had left him exhausted but determined. That day, he was supposed to pick up Naomi from school, a responsibility he deeply valued. "Bright, don't forget to pick up Naomi today. She's so happy when you do," reminded Sandra as she prepared lunch. "Of course, my love. I just need to finish organizing these tools. I'll be there on time, replied Bright with a tired smile. However, time seemed to slip through Bright's fingers faster than he anticipated. Deeply engrossed in his tasks, he didn't realize it was time to pick up Naomi. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in the schoolyard, patiently waiting, watching the other students being picked up by their parents. "Did your dad forget you today?" asked Anna, a classmate, with a tone of curiosity mixed with childish malice. "No, he's coming. He never forgets," Naomi replied confidently. But minutes turned into hours, and Bright still hadn't arrived. Finally, Sandra, worried about the delay, decided to call him. The panic on Bright's face when he answered the phone said it all. "Sandra, I lost track of time. Go pick up Naomi immediately," he said, his voice laden with guilt and urgency. Sandra dropped everything she was doing and rushed to get a boat to take her to the school. Meanwhile, Naomi, tired of waiting and hungry, decided it was time to go home alone. Putting her small backpack on, she began to walk along the trail she knew so well. That same afternoon, David, a businessman from Manaus, was in the community for a conference on environmental preservation. He was on the phone, distracted by a heated discussion about investments, while driving on one of the narrow dirt roads. His eyes were fixed on the phone screen, and he didn't notice Naomi crossing the road until it was too late. The sound of screeching brakes against the dirt echoed through the forest, followed by a dull thud. David got out of the car, horrified, seeing the small girl lying on the road, her backpack and lunch scattered around. "My God, what have I done?" exclaimed David, kneeling beside Naomi. She was unconscious, blood trickling from a wound on her head. Without a second thought, David picked Naomi up and put her in the car, driving frantically to the nearest hospital in the city. On the way, he called his assistant, his voice trembling with desperation. "Lucas, I hit a child. I'm taking her to the hospital now. I need you to find her parents." She was wearing a school uniform from the Riverside community. "Do whatever it takes," David said as he drove. Back in the community, Sandra finally reached the school, only to find the place deserted. Her heart raced, and a paralyzing fear took hold of her. She ran to the principal, who was closing the gate. "My daughter, Naomi, is she still here?" asked Sandra, almost out of breath. The principal looked concerned. "No, Sandra, everyone has left. I thought your husband had already picked her up," the principal replied, her voice tense. Sandra felt the world collapse around her. Without a phone and without money, she decided to run to a neighbor's house for help. That's when she saw Bright, who had rushed out of the house upon realizing the gravity of the situation. "She's not at the school, Bright. Our girl isn't there," Sandra cried, tears streaming down her face. "We need to find her. Let's head to the city." "Maybe she went there," suggested Bright, trying to stay calm. As they drove towards the city, David arrived at the hospital. Naomi was immediately taken to the emergency room, where doctors began working frantically to stabilize her. David, sweating profusely, waited anxiously for news. "Please, she has to survive." "I'll do anything," murmured David, more to himself than to anyone else. Hours passed, and finally, a doctor came out of the room with a grave expression. "She's in critical condition. She suffered a severe brain hemorrhage. We need to operate immediately, but we don't have the necessary equipment here. She needs to be transferred to Manaus," the doctor explained. David knew he had to act quickly. He arranged for Naomi's transfer, covering all expenses and ensuring she received the best possible treatment. That night, as Bright and Sandra arrived at the city hospital, their worst nightmare became reality. Upon being informed about the accident, the ground seemed to disappear beneath their feet. Sandra fell to her knees, tears uncontrollably streaming down her face. "My daughter! Where is my daughter?" she screamed, as Bright held her, trying to stay calm. "We'll find her, Sandra. I promise. We won't give up," said Bright, his voice firm but filled with pain. The journey to find Naomi was just beginning, and the road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. But Bright and Sandra were determined not to let anything or anyone stop them from bringing their daughter back home. The desperate search. Night fell like a dark veil over the Amazon rainforest, bringing with it a cold that seemed to deepen Bright and Sandra's anguish. After receiving the devastating news at the city hospital, they found themselves at a crossroads of despair. Naomi had been transferred to Manaus, but they didn't know exactly where. "We can't waste any time, Sandra. Let's go to Manaus right now," said Bright, trying to stay calm while his wife sobbed beside him. "And if we don't get there in time?" Sandra asked, her voice trembling with fear and pain. "We will. We'll find her. I promise," Bright replied, with fierce determination in his eyes. They grabbed a taxi and followed the winding road that would take them to the state capital. The journey seemed endless, each minute an eternity. Sandra looked at the surrounding forest, feeling trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Bright, despite his resolute exterior, was battling an internal storm of guilt and worry. "It was my fault. I should have picked her up from school. I should have." Bright began, but Sandra interrupted him. "It's not your fault, Bright. No one could have predicted this. We need to be strong for her," Sandra said, gripping his hand tightly. Upon arriving in Manaus, they went straight to the city's largest hospital, where they hoped to find some clue about Naomi's whereabouts. Bright ran to the reception desk, the desperation evident in his voice. "Our daughter was transferred here after an accident. Her name is Naomi. Please, we need to find her," he pleaded. The receptionist, sensing the urgency in Bright's voice, began checking the records. "Yes, we have a girl who arrived recently. She's in the ICU. I'll take you there," she said, leading them through the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital. Entering the ICU, they were met by a doctor with a grave expression. "Are you Naomi's parents?" he asked. "Yes, we are. How is she?" Sandra asked, her voice full of hope and fear. "Her condition is critical. She suffered a severe brain hemorrhage and needed emergency surgery. We've done everything we can, but now we need to wait and see how she responds," the doctor explained. Sandra fell to her knees, her strength finally depleted. Bright held her, trying to comfort his wife while he himself fought back tears. "Can I see her? Please, I need to see her," Sandra begged. "Of course, but try to be quiet. She needs a lot of rest," the doctor replied, guiding them to Naomi's bed. The sight of their daughter covered in bandages and hooked up to numerous machines was almost unbearable. Sandra approached, holding Naomi's small hand and whispering words of love and encouragement. "We're here, my love. Mommy and Daddy are here. You're going to be okay," she said, tears falling freely. Meanwhile, David, the man who had run over Naomi, was at his home in Manaus, tormented by guilt. He couldn't stop thinking about the little girl and the devastation he had caused to her family. He decided he needed to do more to help. "Tina, I need to go to the hospital. We need to find her parents and see how we can help," he told his wife. "David, you've already done a lot. You're paying all the medical expenses. What more can you do?" Tina asked, concerned. "It's not enough. I need to see this family. I need to look them in the eyes and ask for forgiveness," David replied firmly. At the hospital, David found Bright and Sandra. Seeing them, he felt a lump in his throat but knew he had to face this. "Excuse me, are you Naomi's parents?" he asked hesitantly. Bright turned, recognizing the man from the description given by the doctor. "Yes, we are. And you are?" Bright began. "My name is David. I'm the one responsible for the accident. I'm truly sorry. I'm doing everything I can to help Naomi recover," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Sandra looked at him with a mixture of pain and anger. "You hurt her. Our little Naomi," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and nothing I say or do can change that. But I promise I'll do everything I can to help her recover. Please, let me help," David pleaded. Bright placed a hand on Sandra's shoulder, trying to calm her. "We need all the help we can get. If you really want to help, Then do it. For Naomi, he said, looking firmly at David. The following days were a constant struggle between hope and despair. Naomi was stable, but her recovery was uncertain. Bright and Sandra stayed by her side, day and night, refusing to leave the hospital. One morning, while Sandra was by Naomi's side, holding her hand, Bright received a call from the community. It was Dona Iasi, the healer. Bright, I'm praying for Naomi. The spirits of the forest are with her. She is strong like her mother and father. Don't lose hope, said Dona Iasi. Thank you, Dona Iasi. We need all the prayers we can get. We won't give up, Bright replied, feeling a renewed sense of determination. The battle for Naomi's life continued, and meanwhile, the community rallied in support of the family. The voices of support and prayers echoed through the forest, showing that even in the darkest moments, unity and hope could shine like a light in the darkness. And so Bright and Sandra faced each new day with courage, holding on to the hope that their little Naomi would return to them, healthy and smiling. The desperate search for their daughter brought them even closer, strengthening the love and determination that always defined them. Reunion and hope. The days in the hospital dragged on slowly. Bright and Sandra never left Naomi's side as she fought for her life. The hospital waiting room became an extension of their home, a place where hope and despair alternated like the tides of the river that wound through the Amazon forest. Naomi underwent another delicate surgery to relieve the pressure in her brain. Each minute felt like an eternity for Bright and Sandra. David, the man who had hit her, visited regularly, bringing updates about the best specialists he had hired to take care of Naomi. Bright, Sandra, I'm doing everything I can. The best doctors are taking care of her, David said, his voice full of sincerity. We know, David, and we thank you for that. But what matters most now is her strength and our faith, Bright replied, holding Sandra's hand firmly. That night, while Sandra dozed off beside Naomi's bed, Bright stepped out for some fresh air. The night was warm and muggy, and the stars shone brightly in the Amazonian sky. He walked to a small chapel inside the hospital and knelt down. Please, God, let our little Naomi survive. We love her so much. We'll give anything to have her back, Bright prayed, his words laden with emotion. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Dona Iasi, the community healer, who had traveled to Manaus upon hearing about Naomi's condition. The spirits of the forest have heard your prayers, Bright. Naomi is a special child, and she will fight to come back to you, said Dona Iasi, her voice soft but full of conviction. Bright felt a wave of calm and strength wash over him. He thanked Dona Iasi and returned to the ICU, determined to face any challenge that lay ahead. The following days brought small signs of hope. Naomi began to respond to treatments and opened her eyes for the first time since the accident. Sandra was by her side, holding Naomi's little hand when it happened. Naomi, my dear, you're waking up, Sandra exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Naomi blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the soft light in the room. Bright rushed to the bedside, taking Naomi's other hand. Daddy, Mommy, Naomi whispered, her voice weak but full of life. We're here, darling. We're here, Bright responded, his voice choked with emotion. Naomi's recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought new progress, and she was soon out of the ICU, beginning physical therapy to regain her strength. David continued to support the family, feeling increasingly connected to them. One sunny morning, as Naomi practiced walking with the help of a physical therapist, David approached Bright and Sandra. I wanted to say something. Since the accident, I've felt an enormous responsibility for all this. But I've also found a new purpose. I want to help you rebuild your lives and ensure Naomi has everything she needs, David said, his voice full of emotion. Sandra looked at David, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. You've already done so much, David. We forgive you. What happened was a tragedy, but Naomi is coming back to us. That's what matters most, Sandra said, extending her hand to him. David shook her hand, feeling a huge weight lift from his shoulders. As time passed, Naomi fully recovered. She returned to being the joyful and curious child she was before, though with a new wisdom and resilience gained from the experience. Bright and Sandra, now closer than ever, decided to return to their riverside community, taking with them the lessons learned and the support of David, who had become a close friend of the family. When they returned to their small wooden house, they were welcomed with a celebration by the community. The fight against the construction of the road had advanced thanks to Bright and Sandra's continuous efforts, and with David's support, they managed to attract international attention to the cause. "Welcome back, heroes," shouted Dona Iasi, holding a bouquet of flowers for Naomi. "Thank you, Dona Iasi. We're back and ready to continue the fight," Bright replied with a grateful smile. That night, as the full moon shone over the forest, Bright, Sandra, and Naomi sat on their porch, feeling at peace for the first time in a long while. "Mommy, Daddy, do you think the trees still cry?" Naomi asked, looking at the forest. "No, my dear. They don't cry anymore. They sing with joy for having you back," Sandra replied, stroking her daughter's hair. And so, in the heart of the Amazon, the family found not only recovery but also a new hope and renewed purpose. They knew that together, they could face any challenge, protecting not just their family, but also the forest they loved. The story of Bright, Sandra, and Naomi became a legend in the community, a testament to human resilience and the power of love.